All right, and with that, I will introduce these authors and scholars that we are hosting tonight. I was very excited to see in the New York Times summer reading issue that Billy Wilder on Assignment was sort of a headliner for the section about stage and screen. And they wrote that the collection gets to the heart of our enduring obsession with show business and the performing arts. For those on the inside of its gilded cages, what drives them to pursue careers that can be so fulfilling and yet so destructive and soul deadening? And what pleasures, if any, do they take from it? And for those of us watching on the outside, why do we remain fascinated with these people, their private lives, talents, and appetites? And what do we find when we scratch beneath their well-known surfaces? We'll hear more on this tonight from the editor of Billy Wilder on Assignment, Noah Isenberg. Noah Isenberg is the George Christian Centennial Professor and Chair of the Department of Radio, Television, Film at the University of Texas at Austin. Previously, he devoted 15 years of service to the New School in New York City, where he was professor of culture and media and the founding director of the Screen Studies program at the school's Eugene Lang College of Liberal Arts. He is the author of We'll Always Have Casablanca, which earned a spot on the LA Times bestseller list, was named an editor's choice by the New York Times Book Review, and was selected as a summer book of 2017 by the Financial Times, and a best film book of 2017 by the Scotland Herald. It was featured on CBS Saturday Morning with Anthony Mason, Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and Studio 360 with Kurt Anderson, among other media outlets. And we were very privileged to host Noah for a great event in 2017 for that book at Warwick's. He is joined tonight by Shelley Frisch, the translator of Billy Wilder on Assignment. Shelley Frisch is who holds a doctorate in German literature from Princeton, is author of The Lure of the Linguistic, and translator of numerous books from German, including biographies of Nietzsche, Einstein, and a monumental 3-volume Kafka set, for which she was awarded the 2007 Modern Language Association Translation Prize for a scholarly study of literature. Huge deal. She lives in Princeton, New Jersey. Before I leave the screen, please do remember to use the Facebook comments to submit any questions you have. After they are done talking, I'll come back in and convey those questions. You'll also see the link to buy Billy Wilder on Assignment from Warwick's, if you please. So without further ado, please welcome Noah Isenberg and Shelley Frisch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. That was very kind. Shelley, why don't you set things in motion? Do you want to start with a translator's note to give these wonderful people who've joined us this evening and whom we cannot see, but know you are there, a taste of what we undertook in this project? Do you want to start us off?
Happy to do that. I'm going to read a very brief 1.5 page translator's note that's in the book to give you a sense of the nature of the project, how I came to be involved in it, and how we both are just overjoyed that we're able to bring Billy Wilder's early texts to an American readership, to an English language readership. So I'll start in with that. When Noah Isenberg approached me with a plan to bring together the early journalism of Billy Wilder, I couldn't say yes fast enough. Who doesn't love Billy Wilder? Surely we all like it hot, Wilder style. Osgood Fielding III may have declared that nobody's perfect, but Billy Wilder's filmmaking comes awfully close to perfection. I must confess that prior to working on this collection, I'd never read Wilder's early journalism, but once Noah supplied me with the 2 books on which this compilation draws, one a set of Wilder's writings in Vienna and the other of his journalism in Berlin, all composed in the 1920s to about 1930, I was entranced all over again by Wilder's powers of observation that shed light and laughter on the human condition. Wilder's, what Noah calls outsized gift of gab, I love that expression, is in full evidence here. Wilder's humor is sly, subtle, and oblique, giving rise less to belly laughs than to ongoing chuckles. Noah had already pored over the collections of Wilder's journalism, then I joined in the fun. What a cornucopia awaited us. We sought out a selection that would offer readers a sweeping overview of Wilder's reflections on current films, the latest cultural and fashion trends, fickle weather patterns, his own plans to shoot a film, and how that film evolved, and we'll be showing a bit of that tonight, and his encounters with both celebrities, Ernst Lubitsch, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Asta Nielsen, Paul Whiteman, the Tiller Girls, and a whole host of quirky, what he called ordinary people, such as the lucky, real or imagined individual who earned his living by smiling uninterruptedly. Wilder's range is vast. We learn how the smell of matches has evolved, how efforts to modernize cafes wind up erasing our collective memories, how a business tycoon can't manage to see a dentist, how the Prince of Wales suffers from an absurdly privileged ennui, how the art of telling lies ought to figure in the school curriculum. And we learn in two pieces about Wilder's work as a dancer for hire, how that humble job opened the door for his pursuit of journalism. His essays engage and quicken our senses as Wilder's, quote, eager nostrils chase down sense, or how he brings musical life to inanimate objects, such as this passage from Renovation, an Ode to the Coffee House, which infuses the atmosphere of a cafe with the tones of what Wilder calls the molecular miracle of metaphysical ensoulment. And this is from his Ode to the Coffee House. Very brief. Coffee houses have something in common with well-played violins. They resonate, reverberate, and impart distinct timbres. The many years of regular guests clamor has stored their filaments and atoms in a singular way, and the woodwork, paneling, and even pieces of furniture pulse marvelously to the tunes of the visitors' life rhythms. Malice and venomous thoughts of a decade on the blackened walls have settled in as a sweetly radiant finish, as the finest patina. Every sound emanating from the faintest quiver, the most unremarkable braids, comes through and runs endlessly in mysterious waves all across the molecules of the magnificently played sound body day after day. That's the end of the snippet from Ode to the Coffee House. Now I conclude. Wilder's prose is, well, wilder than I usually get to render in my translations. Where else do I get to write about witless wastrels, about an Englishman blessed with hearing like a congested walrus, about a performer with gasometer lungs, or a smoker who can, quote, make his pipe saunter from one corner of his mouth to the other? Wilder's words have verve and paint vivid pictures. They dance the black bottom like the characters who populate his pieces. Noah Isenberg and I hope that the readers of this volume find it a wonderful glimpse into how the Billy Wilder of Vienna and Berlin evolved into the Billy Wilder of Hollywood. Take it away.
Thank you, Shelley. And that sets things up nicely. I think it really kind of lays the parameters, because what I want to do, hot on your heels here now, Shelley, is to kind of give the audience a taste of what lies between these two covers, not only in terms of images, but as you also referenced, a 2-minute clip from one of young Billy Wilder's screenplays, People on Sunday. So we'll get there as well. But here, let me share a screen and we'll move through some of these images that I've prepared. So here, of course, is the cover design for the book. Young Billy Wilder was actually born and given the name Samuel. He was born on June 22nd. It was just his 115th birthday the other day, 1906, in the Galician town, what today is part of Poland, of Sucha, about 30 miles southwest of Krakow. He and his family made their way to Krakow, where he lived as a young boy. His father ran a series of railway restaurants on the Vienna to Lemberg line. His mother, Eugenia, was a colossal fan of Americana, and as a young girl had traveled to New York City and lived with an uncle on Manhattan's Upper East Side on Madison Avenue. It was then that she purportedly took in a show of Buffalo Bill's Wild West touring show, and she was the one who took to calling her son Billy, despite the name Samuel, which was named after her deceased father. Billy, soon after he graduated from high school, my little dog is coming into the room. It was making a little bit of trouble in the background. Sorry for that. Soon after coming to Vienna with his family as a young boy and making his way through the educational system, they lived in Vienna's first district, the hub of culture and commerce, and just across the river from the second district, the so-called Leopoldstadt, where a very large concentration of Jews from the former Habsburg Empire had migrated to Vienna. Wilder's family, that belonged actually to that group, at that point had attained enough means to live in a more middle-class neighborhood. Billy finished high school, or gymnasium as it was called, and soon after made his way to what was then a small media empire run by a Hungarian emigre by the name of Emre Bekesi. He ran two publications, Die Bühne, you see the image before you, and you can see Billy's name underneath it. These are among the first things that he furnished to these two tabloids, to Die Bühne and Die Stunde, were crossword puzzles. And so here you have one of those crossword puzzles. And in fact, very late in life, after he'd racked up some half dozen Oscar awards, it was Wilder who said with his trademark wit that it wasn't so much the Oscars that he was most proud of, but rather that his name had appeared twice in the New York Times crossword puzzle. Here's the visiting card that he used at the time, and you can see that the given name Samuel is still serving as his middle initial here. And what he wrote at this point in time, after kind of through that outsized gift of gab that Shelley mentioned, talking his way, my little dog is making a racket behind me. Stop that, Haribo. He talked his way into the office and landed a job at the two tabloid papers. One of the early pieces that he contributed was an interview with the big band leader Paul Whiteman, who was on a European tour, and you can see young Billy. He's the second from the right, looking kind of a bit cocky, confident. He's 19 years old at this point in time, and through the piece that he devoted to Whiteman, he managed to secure a ticket and credentials, press credentials, to follow the band on the Berlin leg of their tour. And so he made his way to Berlin and really never looked back. He visited Vienna later in life, but Berlin really became his home. I'm going to read, as Shelley, as you just did, I've got two paragraphs that I thought might be relevant before we push on. This is one of the early pieces. I'll get to that in just a second. But they're just two paragraphs from the editor's introduction that deal with this segment of young Billy Wilder's life. This is before he'd adopted the American convention of the Y for his name and was still publishing with the name Billie. Often referred to as Chicago on the Spree, as Mark Twain once dubbed it, Berlin in the mid-1920s had a certain New World waft to it, a cresting wave of Americanism, a seemingly bottomless love of dancing the Charleston, of cocktail bars and race cars, and a world-renowned nightlife that glimmered amid a sea of neon advertisements had swept across the city and pervaded its urban air. It was a perfect training ground for Billy's ultimate migration to America, and a place that afforded him a freedom that he hadn't yet felt in Vienna. As the film scholar Gert Gemünden has remarked in his illuminating study of Wilder's American career, the American-influenced metropolis of Berlin gave Wilder the chance to reinvent himself. During his time in Berlin, Wilder had a number of mentors who helped guide his career. First among them was the Prague-born writer and critic Egon Erwin Kisch, one of the leading newspapermen of continental Europe, who was known to hold court at his table, the so-called Tisch von Kisch, at the Romanisches Café on Berlin's Kurfürstendamm, on the grand avenues of that renowned city street, a favorite haunt among Weimar era writers, artists, and entertainers. Wilder would launch the idea for the film Menschen am Sonntag, People on Sunday, and I'm going to show you that clip in just a bit now, on cafe napkins, so the story goes, at the Romanisches, and a mere handful of years later, Kisch not only read drafts of Wilder's early freelance assignments in Berlin, offering line edits and friendly encouragement, but helped him procure a furnished apartment just underneath him in the Wilmersdorf section of the city. A well-traveled veteran journalist, Kisch had long fashioned himself as der rasende Reporter, the racing reporter. And I'm going to show you an image of young Billy. He really modeled himself after Kisch here. The title that he gave to a collection of journalistic writings that he published, this is now Kisch, not Wilder, in 1925, serving as an inspiration and role model for Billy. A caricature of Wilder from this period encapsulates the very spirit. Let me just show you that real quick, and then we'll come back. There we go. This is the caricature that I was referring to. So Billy arrives in Berlin after traveling with the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, just as he's right around the eve of his 20th birthday. He begins to write again. He looks to people like Kisch. He looks to Klabund, with which he opens his 4-part essay as a dancer for hire. I'm going to show you that. That's right back here. Who was really named Alfred Henschke, but wrote under the name Klabund, and a number of other mentors, just as he would later look to Ernst Lubitsch. There's one short piece in the collection that is a sort of nod to his future mentor in Hollywood, Ernst Lubitsch, and other fellow emigres from Central Europe who made their way to Hollywood after Hitler's rise to power. Lubitsch had already arrived in the 1920s, but Wilder and his gang, so to speak, made their way in the 30s. Shelley, would it be? I don't want to take up too much time, but it would be appropriate. Do you have there was a section, if I'm not mistaken, from this 4-part, which is the big meaty essay with which we opened the collection, which was a 4-part series published initially in the Berliner Zeitung am Mittag, and then later serialized in Die Bühne, one of the 2 tabloids to which young Billy contributed back in his hometown or his adopted hometown of Vienna. Was there a section, or am I imagining this, Shelley, that from the Dancer for Hire piece?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have something that I'd be happy to read right now.
That would be wonderful, because I think it's such a witty and wonderful and very representative piece. It's one of the reasons that we chose to open with it, but that would be terrific if you wouldn't mind.
Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful selection and painfully true to life of Billy Wilder, grappling with his lack of funds and his lack of any sort of position in life. And so this is how he starts out. I'll read a little portion of it. And you'll notice that starting with the place where I'm jumping in, that you already can sense a kind of establishing shot technique that he then uses in his films, setting the scene so that you can visualize it. These are very visual pieces, and you see the budding filmmaker right from the start. So here we are. This takes place in Berlin. Potsdamer Platz. Someone is shouting through the clamor of the traffic, swinging his walking stick, smashing into a baby carriage. Hello, imagine meeting you here. What, you don't recognize me? No? From the Tabarine in Vienna? Yes, of course, Roberts. I sink through the floor in shame. Come for a cognac, it's on me. Got an appetite? Excellent. Car available to Kempinski. And in the restaurant, bring me 2 orders of fish and mayonnaise, 2 beef fillets, English style, medium rare, please, 2 salads, a bottle of 1917 Liebfraumilch, but first 2 large Hennessy's. That is Roberts, the dancer. His hair is black as ink, as shiny as rain-slicked asphalt. His eyes evince the South, his nose and his lips, those of the dead Valentino. He eats a hot lunch and smokes imported cigarettes, coins jingle in his pockets. He pays his rent on time and doesn't owe a single pfennig to the washerwoman. Yes, the word inhibitions has never crossed his mind. Maybe that's how billionaires live. Of course, he's a dancer. Yvette and Roberts. He's danced in London and in Paris, in Warsaw, in Vienna, in Nice, in Karlsbad, in Brussels and in Rome, in San Sebastian, everywhere. While we're eating, he tells me that he's been hired for the entire winter in Berlin, a giant hotel near the Memorial Church. Every evening, Yvette and Roberts and their dances, people are so nice to him, he adds. And you, what are you up to? I lower my head so he can't see my collar. Well, this and that. I tell him I don't have anything at the moment, no job for the past 3 weeks already, but that something will turn up soon. I even have an idea, I say. I always have ideas. Can I help you? Roberts puts his hand on my arm. I tug on my tie and look away, read the label on the wine bottle. You are tall enough. What am I? You have suits, a tuxedo? Well, sure. Well, of course, they're just in hock right now. You have some sense of how to bow in high society, how to kiss a woman's hand? I'm baffled. You dance, I know that. Now I'm asking you, don't you want to capitalize on all that? My face goes blank. Do you want to earn money? I'm now slack-jawed. Money, lots of money. Not a word. You'll become a dancer for hire with us. You'll present yourself tomorrow. Then he asks for the check, pulls a 100-mark bill out of his wallet, thereby revealing another dozen of those bills, and holds it out to the waiter. Yes, I'll present myself tomorrow. Do we have time for just a little bit more from this one?
I think we do.
This is now the first day in the hotel. I'll keep it short.
No,
And
that's great.
Robert sends me 200 marks to, quote, to outfit you for the time being in a manner befitting your station. I turned over 75 marks to my landlady, a conto, went to the pawn shop, picked up my suitcase full of clean clothing from the washerwoman across the street, spent an hour at the barber shop, lingered just as long in front of the mirror, knotted my tie again and again, brushed and smoothed. I'm sitting in a club chair in the hotel lobby. Hotel lobbies figure often in these early pieces, as they do in film and even in philosophy of the time. A soft chair and leaning far back, one leg over the other, and I'm up to my 10th cigarette at 12 pfennigs a pop. This then is the hotel I'm to work in. The bellboy at the revolving door, thinking I'm a guest, has tipped his cap gracefully. Now the Persian lamb coat of a lady in narrow crocodile leather shoes brushes against my knees as she walks toward the lift, smiles at the page boy, and disappears. A thin fragrance of coty lingers in the air and stirs up my nerves. A valet, laden with luggage, stumbles to the door. A gentleman in a raglan coat with a stiff foot enters his name into the hotel register while the porter, his back bent over, holds out his palm to an elderly couple, and the bartender balances 2 Manhattans and a soda. I say to myself, I'm a fool. Sleepless nights, misgivings, doubts. The revolving door has thrust me into despair, that's for sure. Outside it is winter. Friends from the Romanisches Café, all with colds or debating sympathy and poverty, and just like me yesterday, have no idea where to spend the night. I, however, am a dancer. The big wide world will wrap its arms around me. In the ballroom, slender-legged women sit at small tables, sipping mocha coffee. They're putting their cups down and sizing me up, their crimson lips puckered into a honey-peeved smile. The gazes of jealous husbands and spiffy friends are burning on in my forehead. A dark red light spills onto the dance floor. The Spaniards on the podium squeeze a tango argentino out of their accordions and sing in foreign accents. I'm dancing with a woman of exotic beauty, white powdered arms tightly wound around my neck, the fragrance of Narcisse Noir emanating from her hair. And I'll stop there. That's his fantasy about how it's all going to play out.
No, I think that's great, and it's such a wonderful piece, that opening piece. Herr Ober, bitte einen Tänzer. Waiter, a dancer, please. So thank you for reading those sections. I already showed the caricature, but as you were reading, I'm hopeful that the people can get a sense not only of the texture of young Billy's experience in Berlin at the age of 20, but also anticipate some of the, sorry, you get some real sounds outside from Brooklyn, fire engine, but also anticipation of some of the same themes that he would take up later in Hollywood in such films as Some Like It Hot. And in fact, the Tiller Girls, this piece, the Tiller Girls are here, about the arrival of the Manchester-based all-girl dance troupe that passes through Vienna. And Billy writes his piece here for Die Bühne, for one of the two tabloids there in Vienna. Also, a number of kind of allusions to the later all-girl band, Sweet Sue and her Society Syncopators, in this piece as well. But I think that in the Dancer for Hire piece, Shelley, from which you just kindly read, you get a taste of that urban affinity, and as in the case of the film from many decades later, Some Like It Hot, partly filmed very close to Warwick's in La Jolla at the Hotel Del, and taken for of course the Seminole Hotel in Florida. But you get a taste of that urban sensibility, and Billy Wilder, young Billy Wilder's engagement with that, which is a German-inflected sensibility, and Viennese-inflected, of course, when he starts out, but it also already has an eye towards pretty much all things American, including, I should say, foremost among them, motion pictures. And so I think that we can see, and here this is just a montage of some of the American films, the Hollywood films, for which he's most famous. From Double Indemnity here on the left side at the top from 1944 to Sunset Boulevard from 1950. I already mentioned to you, of course, Some Like It Hot. Working on a project, I think about Some Like It Hot every day, 24/7 now. And then to the right, of course, with Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon in The Apartment from a year later. These are the kinds of films that we all, I think, have, or at least I'll speak for myself, have roiling around in our minds. And these are the images, of course, that we associate with the Billy Wilder who went on to become so famous on these shores, and to rack up those 6 Academy Awards and appear twice in the New York Times crossword puzzle. Here is an early photo, however, from August of 25 of the young Billy when he was trying to ingratiate himself, I think, in the sort of in the cultural vanguard of Vienna, the circle around Max Reinhardt. Everybody who became anybody in entertainment, in theater as well as on the big screen, passed through Max Reinhardt and passed through initially his Theater in the Josefstadt in the 8th district of Vienna, and then later the Reinhardt's Deutsches Theater in Berlin. And beyond that, so many of these members of the Reinhardt Circle traveled like young Billy in 1933, just weeks after Hitler's stunning ascent to power in January of that year, on to Paris and finally to Hollywood. I'd mentioned how through that outsized gift of gab, young Billy talked his way into the editorial offices, Bekessi's editorial offices of Die Bühne and Die Stunde. But the story that he liked to tell, and you got a taste of the dancer for hire. He would like to talk late in life about how he worked as a gigolo. That's what he called himself. So the dancer for hire quickly morphed into gigolo. And there are certain gigolo qualities, at least the way that he fashions himself in that first person account. In the piece, but in this particular case, the story that he told is how he got that first job as a writer. As he arrived at the editorial offices on a Saturday and walked into Dr. Hans Liebstöckel. He's the second from left, who was the theater editor and critic for Die Bühne, for the stage. And at that very moment, Dr. Liebstöckel was apparently having sex with his secretary. And he quickly buttoned up his fly and said, "It's a good thing I was working overtime," is what he said to young Billy, and soon handed him a few assignments. That's the story that Billy liked. I mean, that's almost as if ripped from one of the screenplays from Billy's work. Apropos screenplays. In the second half of the 1920s, while he's still filing freelance pieces at a relatively rapid clip, young Billy begins to write screenplays for a number. First, he does them in a ghostwriter's capacity, uncredited, but soon he ends up filing screenplays and is credited for them. This is an early film, an early screenplay for him, a late silent film, but an early screenplay for Billy. This is Ernst Lemle. So this is the nephew of Uncle Carl, as he was affectionately known, Carl Lemle of Universal Studios. This was his nephew, Ernst Lemle, who did this film called Der Teufelsreporter. This is the hell of a reporter, or Devil's Reporters. It's sometimes translated. I don't know which one you prefer. I think we've gone over this before, Shelley. You prefer hell of a reporter to Devil's Reporter?
I think we're both with hell of a reporter.
That's why I keep going with it. Anyway, Billy writes this screenplay, a screenplay that deals with, big surprise, journalism in the big city, and captures that world, the world that he knew firsthand, just as other journalists on these shores, a la Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur and others. Think Front Page, a screenplay that Billy would adapt late in his Hollywood career with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon, and that is perhaps more famously adapted by Howard Hawks in his Girl Friday. But Billy writes what he knows, writes on that world, and even in that film, we just have a frame enlargement from it. There's a cameo by young Billy in Hell of a Reporter, playing one of the reporters. I mean, you can think reporters on screen. You can think, for instance, of Frank Capra, It Happened One Night, and Clark Gable early on with his sort of crew, his posse of reporters in that film. And here we have somewhat of a similar scene in front of us. In the collection that Shelley so wonderfully translated and that we put together, there is a piece called Berlin Rendezvous, in which Billy Wilder writes about his favorite places for romantic trysts. And among those favorite places is the so-called Normaluhr, this oversized clock at the Zoologischer Garten railway station. And this is another frame enlargement, like the one from Der Teufelsreporter. But it shows that after writing about this, just a mere year, 2 years later, when he crafts the script, and as he liked to tell it on scrap paper, on napkins at the Romanisches Café on Kurfürstendamm, he sets one of the scenes, and I'm now going to show you, it's a short clip from the film, sets one of the scenes right there at this rendezvous spot, the Normaluhr. Here's the 2-minute clip for you from Menschen am Sonntag. In the collection, I'm going to show you the clip in just a second. Let me just add a couple more brief things. There are 2 pieces in the anthology devoted to the film. And what's kind of funny and very playful and very, very sort of echt Billy is that although he was indeed the screenwriter for this film, he also took it upon himself to do the publicity for it and become something of a press agent for his own movie. And so there's sort of puff pieces that he writes about the film. And I always like to think of him sort of anticipating Tony Curtis, who he would cast just a year later. But I'm thinking of his performance in Sweet Smell of Success as Sidney Falco, is that sort of shifty press agent. And I think that Wilder shows a few early affinities in writing the two pieces about this film, a film that was made on a shoestring budget, that was a budding group of young Hollywood transplants. Fred Zinnemann, for example, Billy said he basically just held the reflector that they used when shooting. Robert Siodmak, together with Edgar G. Ulmer, picked up the co-director credit on this picture. Eugen Schriftan, who was very, very well known as a cinematographer, does cinematography. And I could go on and on. But anyway, this is one of the great and most beautiful late silent pictures from the era. And it is very much a love letter to Berlin on the eve of its apocalypse. Here's the 2-minute clip. And the romantic tryst continues. Wolfratshausen here, these were all non-actors, non-professionals. He's here with Crystal Ehlers. They each are playing the professions that they actually pursued in their off-screen lives. And so Wolfgang is a wine merchant and gigolo, and modeled to a certain extent, I think, after Wilder's experiences as that dancer for hire. Christel is an aspiring actress. There is Birgitta Borchardt, who is works at the Electrola shop and is selling records. And then there's, of course, a taxi driver, Erwin Spletstößer. Anyway, sorry. I wanted to show you just a shot while they were filming this, again, made on a minuscule budget, very much in opposition to the sort of high gloss fantasies attached over at the UFA studio, which was the premiere studio. It was very much in opposition to it, very much in anticipation of the work that would be done immediately after the war among the Italians and the wave of Italian neorealism, and then even anticipating some of the work that the French New Wave directors would do, and the Dogma 95 in Denmark, in terms of, you have no artificial light, They're using non-professional actors, and you see here Wolfgang von Weitershausen in the middle, flanked by Christel Ehlers and Brigitta Borchardt. The record of the day was in einer kleinen Konditorei, in the little pastry shop. It was a guest selling thousands. And they thematize these things that very much speak to the sensibilities of young people of that day. And in fact, one of the working titles was Young People Like Us. And in Billy's piece, in Billy Wilder's piece in the collection, he remarks how these people that you see on screen, that's you and that's me. Audience members responded with enormous affection to the film, not only because it stood in such marked contrast to these glossy, high-budget pictures that you know were created in Babelsberg at UFA Studio, but that they had a kind of a youthful and playful quality to them. And I think that much of that radiates from the pages here in Billy Wilder on Assignment. I see you, Amanda, and I will stop sharing screen here, and I'm happy for us to field some questions. The very last image here, Amanda, is when Wilder makes his way to Hollywood. This is his first year there. Was already in the Hotel Ansonia in Paris with Peter Lorre, and Peter Lorre is right behind him. Wilder's, you can see in the center of this film, in the center of this photograph, and just behind him to the left is Peter Lorre. They then became roommates in Hollywood as well. They apparently occupied the antechamber to the women's bathroom at the Chateau Marmont Hotel. That's my last anecdote. Happy to field some questions. Let me stop the share. There we go.
Antechamber to the women. That seems like a good spot to land. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just a super basic question. How did you and Shelley hook up on this project? And also, just how did it go? Was Shelley's work first, and then you came in, and just how does that translator-editor relationship work in this case?
Shall I field this first, Shelley, or you?
Yes, because I don't actually know how you first decided to approach me. Yeah. So I'll be learning as you speak.
You were the one and only, Shelley. I approached nobody else. I knew these. I was a graduate student at Berkeley a long time ago, decades ago. And when doing dissertation research, I stumbled upon some of these texts, and I was always attracted to them and drew on them. So in earlier work of mine, I just showed you that clip from People on Sunday, mentioned am Sonntag. One of the co-directors is Edgar G. Ulmer, and I devoted a decade of research to writing this critical biography of Ulmer that appeared in 2014 from University of California Press. And in conjunction with that book and with other research on this, I've also been very, very kind of endlessly fascinated by the emigre scene in Hollywood in the 30s and into the 40s. And so these texts just kept coming up. They'd never been translated before. There were a couple of just exceptions, I think an excerpt from maybe the Dance for Hire text, I'm not sure, maybe here and there, but otherwise, anybody who did not have access to the German language, they were deprived of these wonderful texts. And so that, in a nutshell, is what prompted me to think, Anglo-American readers, they need access to these texts. They do. And if the response to the publication indicates anything, is that yes, indeed, they definitely do need it. And that's where Shelley came in. And Shelley, I knew her work as a translator. I was very, very familiar with the Dietrich Riefenstahl double biography that she translated, with the Kafka, the 3-volume Kafka biography that you also mentioned, and admired her work and thought that she would be ideal for the task at hand. And that's where Shelley came in.
Okay. So to take it from there, as I read in the translator's note, as soon as Noah opened the door to my participation in this project, I was hooked instantly. Often I waffle for a while with new projects, not here. This was right up my alley. I actually, in an earlier incarnation, taught film history, so this dovetailed perfectly with my own interests. And, back in the days, I mean, this really dates me, but before videos were even a thing. Um, and, um, and so when I was teaching in New York at Columbia, I would have to get the film, the reels of film from, say, New Line Cinema in Midtown, and hire student projectionists. I had to teach my students how to write in the dark because they were going to see this all of once and then write their papers based on that one viewing, maybe a term paper, based on one viewing. And then second, the student projectionist was finished showing the film. It had to be packed up and sent back. So there was a very different sense of what viewing a film was back then. There was really no stopping the film for stills even or anything like that. So you saw it once and you had to know what you needed to know. And of course there was, needless to say, nothing like Google or whatever that you could quickly track down any kind of detail. So this is, that takes me back to my early days of teaching film. And then I went in other directions professionally, but I was always interested in this. So I'd done, as Noah mentioned, the Dietrich Riefenstahl dual biography, which was a fascinating look into these two women who couldn't be more different and yet couldn't be more alike in some fundamental ways. So I was back in that cinematic mode, and then we basically started putting our heads together about which of the many pieces we would like to use from these two collections, one written in Vienna and one in Berlin. And you would think that that would be maybe a contentious thing. I don't remember ever once being at loggerheads with you about anything. We just, we'd say, well, what about this one and not that one? And whichever one said that, the other one said, great, that's just what I was thinking. So it was really a kind of amazing collaboration. We talked about, because Noah is also fluent in German. He, in his earlier incarnation, he was a teacher of German. So I never had to fill him in on any of the linguistic aspects of this. So we could talk about, just the nitty gritty of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. And we only got together, I guess, on 2 occasions really to discuss the project per se, but most of it was done through phone calls and emails, and I couldn't have wished for a better person to work with on this project. And of course, Billy was always there as our
Yeah.
what you might say,
Billy
third
continues
musket.
to haunt me.
Right. And I've always been a big fan of Billy Wilder's films, so this gave me a chance also to rewatch some of them and see how what I was translating potentially fed into the later cinematic work, and that was very exciting for me.
Let me just
So
say,
go
if
ahead.
I
Go
may,
ahead.
sorry, it's a compliment, but it's also I think it helps to explain the process and how we did this. The compliment is that not only is Shelley an incredibly talented translator, but she's an incredibly fast translator, and so this was done. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, Shelley, almost in a single summer. I mean, it was really, really fast.
It was. Let me say something about fast.
Okay.
Appears fast and it appears effortless, but that's because I work all the time.
Yeah.
And I consider that to my own personal detriment, but I do work sort of around the clock. So fast is a funny term because I actually think that I ponder each word sort of forever, but because I never stop with it. Once I'm on a roll, I just stay in the zone. And much to the horror, I think, of the rest of my family. Um, and then, I would just be thinking about how these words fit together. And I'm a big fan of, for example, of alliteration, maybe more so even than Billy Wilder. And so, I would inject some things and I would say to Noah, what do you think? Is this a bridge too far? But as I said before, we never disagreed about anything. So, he would just say, go with it. This is fine. And so we kept on going, and next thing you knew, we had this book, and we worked together with a fabulous editor at Princeton University Press, Anne Savarese, who was who cheered us on through the whole thing. And I've worked with her before. I worked with her on the Kafka biography, and I've just finished another project with her. And so we really, luck was on our side, I would say, from so many directions. And now the press is just, we're just so delighted with readers out there, reviewers and readers enjoying the book the way we have.
I didn't realize you were also fluent in German, Noah. Did you two ever disagree on any point of translation?
No, and I've tried by hand in translation a little bit, and I'm not really cut out for it. I so admire people who do it well, like Shelley. I may not be patient enough. So I mean, we would talk things through, and there were times when I would make a suggestion, and if that then suited Shelley, or if it made sense, if it was an improvement on the initial wording, then fine. Otherwise, we kind of go back to the initial wording and things like that. But yeah, both of us have spent years in Germany and studying German. Both of us, did PhDs in German studies, so we have that. That's our in our former lives. When you then made the move to translating full time, and I made the move deeper and deeper into film studies. So,
Shelley, you mentioned you have a new project you're working on. Are you allowed to talk about it yet, or?
Well, I have the one with Anne that I mentioned that I just finished, and it's slated for March publication of next year. It's another Kafka project. It's a new annotated edition of his aphorisms, which are his most puzzling but also most central texts. And it's annotated by the very same biographer who did the 3-volume Kafka biography. So you might almost call this outtakes, but it's a wonderful book, and I'm just delighted to have had the opportunity to work on that. I'm also early in a project, but I suppose I can just lift the lid on it a little bit. This is a German book that was in German called Adorno in Neapel, Adorno in Naples, Italy. And it shows how many of the philosophical currents of that time evolved from some of the spatial relationships that he discovered in Naples, and working with the materiality of his environment there, and the people that he got together with there, and how this shaped his philosophy. It's an interesting route of entry, just to see how, for example, the porous nature of the walls there became a springboard for philosophical contemplations, not only by Adorno, but his whole entourage.
Benjamin writes on that as well. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
And Krakauer.
And Krakauer as well.
Right.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know you were doing that project. That's wonderful. Thank you for asking the question.
So yeah, I'm doing that with Yale University Press.
Okay, fantastic.
And that's been delightful so far. But I'm at a pretty early, far enough in that I can talk about it, but not so far that like you can pin me down to exactly when I'll be finished.
Yeah. Oh, you'll get there.
That sounds great. And Noah, you mentioned something around.
Oh, I owe to my editor at Norton, the same editor for whom I wrote the Casablanca book. I'm a little behind on Some Like It Hot, a kind of cultural history, the Great American Sex Comedy. But like the Casablanca book, it will go back to to cross the Atlantic once more and deal with the sort of antecedents. What it was that kind of ultimately found its way on the screen. Some of those antecedents we actually got little tastes of, traces of as well today in the presentation. So I'm doing that, and then I need to do a short interpretive biography. I'm very excited to do, and I hope to get to do a short interpretive biography of Wilder for that. Again, also for like you, Shelley, I'm trying to follow you to Yale University Press. They have a Yale Jewish Live series. These are slender.
Oh yeah.
Biographers devoted to Molly. We did a conversation with Molly Haskell. She did one on Spielberg. There's one on the Warner Brothers by David Thompson that came out recently. There's a Kubrick one to Stanley Kubrick by David Mickix. Anyway, I'm excited to do that, but I need to I promised my editor at Norton I'd finish the Some Like It Hot. So that's what and I'll be out in La Jolla in a few weeks, end of July, August, and I'm hoping to make it over to the Hotel del Coronado and do a little site visit.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
By the sea, by the sea.
Yeah. This has been great. For our viewers out there now and in the future, in the ether, if you're social media people, you two, what's the best way for people to follow you?
Twitter, huh?
I think it's fair to say that we are frequent tweeters.
We maintain an active presence on that dreaded Twitter.
I'm Shelley Frisch, and I think you're Noah Isenberg.
I
just
am.
typed in and your name comes up. So
yeah,
right.
That's probably Amanda. I think that's where you'd find us. Probably too often.
Often.
We've both gone down that rabbit hole.
I'm sure you enrich the platform.
Well, we do our best.
Yes. Thank you both so much for being here tonight. And everyone, buy the book. I love that section you read, Shelley. It was it was almost ominous, like, oh, he has these beautiful ideas of how the dancer's life is going to go, and you can tell it's the twittering birds in the pleasant meadow, and then
exactly. For example, when he thinks he's going to get a luxurious meal in this luxurious restaurant, and then he discovers, no, it's upstairs in the servants' quarters. He's going to get stale bread instead of caviar.
It's where the dancers eat. Yeah, well, please do, and please support Warwick's. I love that bookstore, and it's figured very prominently throughout my youth. So yeah, love what you're doing, and hope to do in-person events before too long, when it's safe to do so.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you
both so much. Yep, and we'll see you soon. We'll see you in La Jolla.
No, yeah, I'll be there. I'm visiting Mom and my sister soon.
Excellent. All right, with that, goodbye, Internet.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Appreciate it, Amanda. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. See you, Shelley.
Okay, see you. Bye-bye.